Welcome to the Morundacast, where we discuss effective leadership in the healthcare industry. We hear from leaders that are working in the healthcare industry right now, what have been their challenges, what have been their effective leadership styles, and what can we learn from some leadership failures. So we're lucky enough to have with us today James Feliciano, former president of AbbVie and now acting as a senior advisor to AbbVie. Welcome, James. How you doing?
Great. Thanks.
All right, so let's start. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey into the healthcare industry.
Sure. So yeah, I'm James Feliciano. I've been in Japan probably a total of over 25 years. I first came when I was a junior in college and did a year abroad, and then went and got a master's degree in Japanese studies, and then from there spent most of my 20s in Japan, doing various jobs and what have you. I went back to the States. I career switched. I got an MBA and then career switched into pharma. And I've been in the pharma industry since about 2000. So about almost 25 years. Of those 25 years, about 20 of them have been in Japan, doing pharma in Japan. Started off as a product manager, new products marketing for Wyeth Pharmaceuticals. And
Right, yeah.
I've worked my way up. 4 companies later, and winding up this segment of my career at AbbVie. I was there as their GM, country manager, for 9.5 years, and now I'm a senior advisor.
I think when we first met, I remember meeting you at the Wyeth offices. Maybe it's in Kyobashi, I forget now.
It wasn't
back in your
Kyobashi, yes.
office. Yeah, that's right.
Long time ago.
Yeah, right. So when you joined AbbVie, I think it was just after the separation of Abbott. Was that right?
It was.
13, 15?
So the separation happened in 2013. I joined as the GM in June of 2015.
Right. So I think that's a unique leadership challenge, right? So big pharma being separated. So when you look back on that time, what were the major challenges?
Yeah, it's interesting to kind of like think back and think upon all that, because one of the things for me was that I was a pretty fresh country manager as well. I had been I was the country manager of Merck Serono at the time when I got the opportunity, and Merck Serono was relatively small, maybe about 325 people at the time, and AbbVie was much larger, more than double the size. And, there's a lot of big expectations around, the split and how that was going to create shareholder value. But, I was, again, very junior and quite young by many standards in terms of being a country manager in pharma in Japan at the time. So I think one of the biggest challenges I had was going and joining AbbVie and having credibility within AbbVie, first and foremost. So there had been a gap between my entering in the previous country manager, and the regional vice president was kind of leading Japan from Singapore, so kind of leading it remotely. So there were a lot of the business unit directors and the management team. They were really functioning a very autonomous. There wasn't really of course, wasn't a country manager in place at the time. And then for me to step in as a very, not a very seasoned general manager, them seeing my resume and kind of think, who is this guy? Getting credibility first was like one of the big challenges for me at that time.
So I think that's probably a challenge for all new leaders coming into a position, whether it's even a marketing manager, they're coming from another company right through to a company presence. So how did you get that credibility?
Yeah, look, I think the first thing is you just have to show genuine interest and a genuine willingness to listen and to understand. I always kind of go back to, the 7 habits of highly effective leaders. And one of the ones that I really like is seek first to understand before being understood. And so what I did in the beginning was just to really try to just get my head around the business, to understand, to listen to them, to hear their thoughts. I joined in June 1st of 2015. The schedule, the calendar of the company was that there was going to be an all hands meeting at the beginning of every year where the entire company would come together. And that's usually, or that's always in, late January or early February. So, after a few weeks of listening and understanding, and, I realized, look, let's use the February timeline of that all employee meeting as a chance where I could kind of roll out my vision for where things are going to go. And for me, as a leader, my style is very, very visionary. I like to kind of put together something that we can all get around and all gather around it and believe in, and have, a shared commonality in what we're doing, with a pathway forward. But one of the challenges that I had was I still, again, didn't have a lot of credibility. It became almost like a vision forged at the United Nations or something. Like every country had to have something, or every department had to have, and it was very cumbersome. And what we ended up rolling out as we called at the time, our 5-year focus, which would take us from 2021 to 2025. The first version of that had so many items in it. It was really, really heavy with text, and it felt like it covered like almost, I had to get in hopes of getting alignment with people and getting people on the bus. I kind of gave away a lot and let a lot of things to get in there. And it was a very busy vision. I look back on it now and I kind of almost shake my head because I've learned over time, simplicity and clarity is the key, especially when creating a vision like that. But I just didn't have, again, that credibility with the management team at the time yet. So to get something forward, I had to be very inclusive, which it then became kind of bulky. But we did roll it out, and, it started getting some traction and some momentum. And, I think there's a lot to be said for repetition of key things. And I was always just trying to really focus on our 5-year focus, kind of everything we were doing. How does it relate to that? And, after 2 years of the 5-year focus, we were on track. We were doing quite well. And I took the management team and key people from AMT -1 for a 2-day offsite and to kind of do a check-in, a year 3 check-in of that 5-year plan. And we were able then to really simplify it and to make it much easier to follow, much easier to remember, much more easier to communicate on. And I think that was a pretty good indication at that point that, the team was behind this. We were all on the bus. We all knew that we wanted to see this forward, and it made sense for everybody. So version 1, kind of bulky, not great, a nice effort, I think. Version 2, that happened in 2018, that we rolled out at the all employee meeting, much clearer, that a much nicer refresh. Just everything was much, much easier for everyone to understand. I think that's when we really saw great acceleration.
And having that vision, having that clear focus of the company, what were I think there were definite business outcomes of your success in the business and the growth and having great products and rolling those out. But from a outsider's perspective, I've really seen, and I think people see you as someone who likes to grow and develop teams, is the decrease in the amount of turnover of, like, I remember back in the day, Abbott, before AbbVie, must have had a 10 or a 12% in turnover. And I think now I'm not sure. My guess is it's 2 or 3%. So, I guess that is a direct result of that sort of focus and that cultural change.
I think, I think so. And, we track engagement very closely, and I wish I could show it's somewhat proprietary, but we have a very clear X graph that shows as engagement has gone up over the years, our voluntary turnover has really gone down. And, and you're right, we're below 4.5%. And we have been consistently. A big part of our 5-year focus was, number one, there were business elements of, how do we maximize our marketed products? How do we, launch with success? We were doing a lot of product launches, and how do we drive our pipeline? But then the other side of that, which was really critical, was around employee engagement. And, how are we going to become the company of choice, for example? And how are we going to commit to each employee's development and growth? So, we made those key parts of our 5-year focus. And we really spent a lot of time, not just on the business side, but on engagement and on development. I remember year 3, one of the things that we did that year in particular was we made sure every employee had their own career journey and that they had a specific discussion with their manager about their journey and where they wanted to go, because we knew we were growing so quickly and we were going to be launching so many products that we were going to be hiring, we knew we were going to be hiring on a pretty massive scale, new faces, but that meant a lot of opportunities internally for people, to step up and challenge. So we wanted to make sure that, our existing base of talent had that opportunity to raise their hand first and say, I'm interested in, public affairs, or I'm interested in being an area manager, or, and even, I made the point that even if you just look, I'm a sales rep, I want to be a sales rep. Yeah, no, that's great. But you can be a better version of yourself every year, every day. So maybe you're a sales rep now, maybe you want to, be a sales rep at a key, institute, for example, or to be the sales rep for a key opinion leader, for example, which has very different elements of that job versus, other sales rep roles. So every role has nuances, and there's always a path to grow.
So let me take you back to maybe the wife days when you first started managing people. What were some of perhaps the lessons you made when you first, managing 2, 3, as a marketing manager or marketing director? What are some of the lessons that you learned back in the early days? Maybe mistakes, and that's when we do learn from our mistakes.
Well, because through your path as a employee and developing into a leader, is you ultimately move from an individual contributor to a people manager, and as you move on that people manager journey as well, I mean, ultimately you get further and further away from the business, from the real boots on the ground, and you're more about managing people. And at every level, you have to kind of let go more and more. And you have to trust and empower. And, so for example, as a product manager, you're really, that product is almost like your child. You're out there talking to key opinion leaders, you're doing all the marketing strategy, you're doing the brainstorming. And then, when you turn into a senior product manager or business unit manager, you have to remember that my job is not to get in the trenches all the time. It's to provide feedback, to support, and at the right moments to give feedback. So I think for me, the point of how do you let go as you're moving up, and it's harder. It gets harder and harder the higher up you get. Even as a general manager, I'm always a marketer at heart, right? And I love being in those, with that whiteboard and having those conversations and thinking about segmentation and things. I mean, that's what I got my MBA in. I love creating that. But when you are the general manager, you have to admit that you're no longer part of the creation anymore. You're part of the feedback, which is part of the process.
Right. So when you think of, some of the great leaders, and you've worked with some great people, whether you're reporting to them or you're working alongside them, what has made them great? What are the characteristics of a great leader, do you think?
Yeah. And I was so thinking about this question. I like it a lot. I think the really great leaders that I've had, they trust. They trust and they empower. They don't just completely delegate, everything, but they challenge and they engage at the right times. But there's always a very healthy kind of mix of trust and empowerment with engagement and challenging, and they balance those two. And especially, I think along the way in my role especially as GM of Japan, one of the things that AbbVie did not have was a real the headquarters didn't have a really good understanding of Japan. They had struggled with that, and I came in with a lot of experience about how things are in Japan. And thankfully, the headquarters executive leadership, they listened to me and they listened to my opinion, and they were willing to take risks on, based simply on the fact that I said, I think this is the way to go. Of course, with the appropriate metrics and the appropriate KPIs, and it would always, and we'd have the right check-ins along the way for milestones, but to at least have the willingness to say, okay, James, we'll let you run with that, and to have that trust in me and the team. And then I think over the last 10 years, we've really built strong relationship between headquarters and Japan, which wasn't there when we first started. And there's really a lot more mutual understanding now, which is just a great accelerator now for the company, I think.
And on the flip side, those leaders that perhaps at other companies that are not so great, what are the characteristics?
Yeah. When I think about leadership, Disney has three kinds of leaders in the Disney kind of leadership framework. And one type of leader that is kind of a transactional leader. And they focus on like structure, roles, and tasks. And they kind of use like reward and punishment and very KPI driven. There's transformational leaders, and then there's servant leaders. And just in my experience, the more transactional type of a leader are usually the most challenging, because they're kind of rule-based, performance-driven, maybe a little more short-term objectives. There may be a lot of double-clicking on things. And that's not to say that there isn't a time and a place for that, but an overly transactional leader, for me, I'm more of a transformational leader. Maybe it's a little bit of a grind sometimes for that. Yeah.
Right. You're willing to let go and willing to trust. And I like what you said before, from, 7 Habits, seek first to understand. And what advice would you give, I don't know, whether it be an expat coming in or someone taking on a new leadership role, could be a country manager for the first time, or it could even be a marketing manager for the first time. And it's like, okay, finally, I've got a team of, people to manage. What advice would you give those folks?
So, over my 20 years here, I've been asked this question a lot. I've been asked by my people when they come to Japan for the first time, what should I do, or how should I approach things? And so, but this is the first time I'm actually going to open it up, to the public. It's special for you, Phil.
Thanks, mate.
But I believe in, and my advice is, for the first 90 days, I said, go and do the 80-20 rule. And the 80-20 rule is that 80% of the time you should be listening. 20% of the time you should be talking. And then of that 20%, 80% of the time you should be asking clarifying questions. And 20% giving opinion. So you basically listen and ask questions. I see so many expats come to Japan and they feel like they're on there's a stopwatch. And I've got 2 years to make something happen. So I got to use every minute, and they end up kind of shooting before they aim. So I think you do yourself a disservice by not first coming in and just listening. And again, it goes back to that seek first to understand, because you're going to have so many opinions so quickly. And I think if, when I'm coaching someone or, I ask them, write down your assumptions from day one. As you have an assumption, just write it in your moleskin and just keep track of it. And then go back 6 weeks later and look at what you assumed versus what you see as the reality now. And it's night and day, that really, you need to give it a minute. You need to kind of see a couple of cycles, you got to see a couple of months worth of data, really form an opinion. But I think people form opinions way too quick.
Right. And I think also in that book, it says, when dealing with people, fast is slow and slow is fast.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's all right. Yeah, understanding first and asking a lot of questions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think you need to show empathy with the fact that, your team, from their perspective, they're like, oh, okay, we've got another form here, and here we go. And, there's a lot of anxiety when that happens, right? When someone from headquarters comes in, and they need to get your speaking cadence, for example. They need to get used to just understanding you and who you are. And it takes time for the team to warm up to you and to get a rhythm going and stuff. And I think the more you do that in a empathetic way of listening and letting them communicate to you instead of just, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. It can be very overwhelming for the team, certainly. And as and Japanese people are just in general, gamansu, they're going to kind of persevere on it instead of maybe vocalizing it and saying, hey, this is a pain point.
That's a good one. How do you get sort of, when you're working with the Japanese team, you're a new leader, again, you're trying to get that credibility, you're trying to get them to talk more than you talk. How do you get people to open up, particularly Japanese? Because Westerners are kind of like almost the opposite, sometimes a little bit of verbal diarrhea, but Japanese are very reserved. How do you get them to really tell you the story behind the story?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the challenges in Western, kind of the Western frame, we're not so comfortable with silence, right? So we'll be very quick to fill the silence, and as to just kind of start throwing out stuff, and then it just has this downward spiral. I think one of the skills that any expat coming to Japan that could spend some time thinking about very good, very strong, open-ended questions, and to really engage when you're engaging with your teams and you're working with them, double click and ask questions, and not just assume that there's, okay, we're good, right? Boom. If you say that, it's over. Yes. Yeah, fine. You have to ask better questions. What do you see in this conversation? What's something I'm missing? That's a much better, it's a much more valuable question. And, it gives your team then an opening to answer that question. If you say, if I ask to the team, okay, anything you want to add? The answer is going to be, no, we're fine. Unless you have someone who's, an all-star who's been at headquarters or.
Right.
But if you ask the team, okay, based on what we've talked about, what's something else we need to think about? What's on your mind when you look at this? What do you think's missing? So, these kind of very meaningful questions can A, develop trust, B, help to increase your understanding, and C, help to create much more of a collaborative, team environment.
Well, thank you very much, James, for your time.
Yeah,
thank you
absolutely.
for being so generous, and really appreciate it. And congratulations. I know your career is not over by any means, and you've got I'm sure there's going to be a million other things that you do and achieve in the years to come, but just congratulations on such a fantastic career at AbbVie, and just doing a spectacular job.
Great. Thanks, Phil. And yes, indeed, I'll be staying in Japan, and I want to continue to contribute to the Japan pharmaceutical industry and to bringing innovation to patients. So I look forward to many, many more years of contributing in that direction.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Matt.